Welcome to the JOMA Preventative Health Podcast, hosted by the Jewish Orthodox Women's Medical Association. We provide you with up-to-date information on health topics geared towards the Orthodox Jewish community. This podcast content is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice or as a substitute for the medical advice of a physician.
Welcome to the Jewish Orthodox Women's Medical Association, or JOMA podcast. I'm your host, Elisa Minkin. I'm a general pediatrician and a proud JOMA member. And I'm really honored and really excited to be here tonight with Dr. Marcy Forta. So before I introduce Dr. Forta, I want to say that this is a really important topic that we are going to cover pieces of. I mentioned it throughout the interview, but I want to say that if you want to listen to more talks on related topics related to eating disorder, body image, teaching your child to eat more healthily, have a healthy, body image, all of these kind of things, you can listen to other podcast episodes that we've done on this. You can just scroll down. I think the very first episode I ever did was Intuitive Eating with Gila Glassberg a couple of years ago, and probably there's 10 related podcasts or more. So you can look at that. We've also, JOMA has done a body image webinar, a 2-part webinar, one for parents, one for teens. It's up on the JOMA YouTube channel. Also, I believe Dr. Forta reached out to me to request to be on the podcast. And I always say, I love when people do that. People who do that are people who are passionate about their fields. And those are the kind of people I want to interview. And she definitely is. So Dr. Forta, EdD, MBA, is the founder and director of Atzmi, an organization dedicated to supporting the mental health of Jewish girls through programs that improve their self-esteem, body acceptance, and reduce the focus on outward appearances. She specializes in eating disorder education, awareness, and prevention, focusing specifically on risk factors and prevention within the Jewish Orthodox adolescent female community. She's also a Body Project Facilitator and a Certified Holistic Nutritionist. Her doctoral research focused on community healthcare stakeholders' descriptions of religious and environmental risk factors unique to the Jewish Orthodox adolescent female community. Community healthcare stakeholders include rabbis, teachers, principals, mental and physical health professionals. Her research was conducted over a period of several years and focused on the U.S. Midwest region. There's long-established evidence supporting prevention programs and their impact, this being the impetus to create Atzmi, as the evidence suggests that their efficacy is vastly improved when tailored to specific demographics. Her research forms the basis of the eating disorder awareness, education, and prevention programs designed for this community. Dr. Forta lives in Oak Park, Michigan. She is a lecturer, blogger, and sought-after expert in the eating disorder field. Her personal website is marcyforta.com, MarcyForta.com. So I'm really excited to have this conversation tonight with Dr. Forta. And again, if people are listening to this podcast and say, hey, they never covered my topic that I'm passionate about, please reach out to us at health, HEALTH, at joma.org.
Welcome, Dr. Forta. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited.
I'm really excited too. So we have so much to talk about. Let's start with just what is Atzmi?
Okay. I created Atzmi to kind of fill a vital role in our community for our adolescent girls. So we know that eating disorders are devastating. They're deadly. They're difficult to treat, and sadly, they're quite prevalent in our community because studies show that Jewish girls are up to 2 times higher. The rate of eating disorder incidence is up to 2 times higher. And since we know that body image issues affect over 70% of teenage girls, it's really important to help girls before it turns into an illness or an issue. And there are eating disorder prevention programs already out there that are created for the secular community, even a couple that have been altered for the frum community. But none have actually been created with the specific risk factors and considerations of our girls in mind. They're just not as comprehensive. They don't address the girls at multiple times throughout their high school, junior high and high school, schooling, and they don't address the parents, nor do they address the teachers, which are all part and parcel of the same issues. So our programs are meant to touch the lives of the most influential people in the girls' lives. Our mission is really just to support the mental health of Jewish girls via programs that improve their self-compassion, their body acceptance, reduce their focus on outward appearance, and then support the development of healthy relationships. The idea is that we allow each girl to find and appreciate her unique self.
That's amazing. So I know about the Body Project, and in fact, that's something you've been involved with as well, correct? Is that what you're talking about?
I was trained in the Body Project. Yes, that's true.
So when you talk about the program that has been adapted, the Body Project is the secular program.
Correct. And they have adapted it from community, but being someone who is trained in it, I just don't think it goes far enough. And I think there are a lot of things in there that maybe are inappropriate for our communities or not as relevant. So we have other risk factors, which is what I did all my studying on. And so I feel like we can implement things that are more targeted.
But what about that body program? I forgot what it was called. They talked about it. It was Laura Levinson because she helped create the
that is the Body Project. Yeah,
that is the Body Project.
Correct. They just I don't know what they renamed it as, but yes, that's what they used as their outline.
I think they call it the Everybody Project, so not to use the word body.
Yeah, could be. I don't remember what it's called, but yeah.
So
yeah, and it has some good parts. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is missing that you're providing through Atzmi?
So really, those projects, those programs, I guess, are really only focused on body image and appearance ideal, right? I want to talk about self-compassion. I want to talk about let's defocus on outward appearances. Let's show the value of our physical bodies, why it's important to us as from people. What does it mean to us? Why is it meaningful? Why do we have to take care of it? How do we define our priorities? How do we set boundaries for ourselves and have healthy relationships? How do we regulate our emotions? I want to give them skills to, give them a lot of skills that they can use for their life, as well as body image and appearance ideal are all touched on.
That's amazing. And for people who listen to my podcast, if you haven't listened to the ones I've done on so many related topics, please scroll back. I must have done 10 related talks. So we're not going to go into great detail about the different eating disorders. We're not going to talk about intuitive eating. We're not going to talk that much about body image. I have covered these extensively. And also, if you look on the JOMA YouTube channel, there is the body image webinar that we did. We did one for parents and one for kids, and it's really worth taking a look at. So we're not going to try to be going over the same territory. It just so happened that in this past week's Five Towns Jewish Home, which is, I know you're in Michigan, but it's a paper that's circulating in the New York area, primarily the Long Island area. It's a terrific paper. It wouldn't be Shabbos without it in my family. And it just so happened that they have a new teen column, which is fantastic. And a teen asked the perfect question for me to use as a springboard. So I'm going to go through it. We're not going to go through the answer. And they're actually going to do part 2 this week that's meant for parents, and I presume with resources. But we're going to go through the question because as a pediatrician, this is really as classic, I think, as it can get. So I'm going to start by telling the beginning part of the letter. The teen says that when she was younger, she was very overweight and she was bullied. And I'm going to stop at that part of the letter and ask what your thoughts were, because I already had a lot of thoughts at that point.
Yes. I mean, it sounds like a pretty common and very sad story. I imagine the girls were not the only people who made her feel insecure about her weight and appearance. Obviously, there are many places that can come from parents, siblings, teachers, any relatives, magazines, social media. It's kind of a pervasive message. It sounds like she has a lot of memories from the girls themselves, but it comes from a lot of places. I thought she actually did a great job describing how she felt and what she's feeling. But it's really important to note that over 83% of people who have an eating disorder also have a comorbid condition, a co-occurring mental health issue, whether it's a depressive disorder, an anxiety or mood disorder, a chronic mental health issue, social functioning. The point is that she might not be in a place to have been able to portray or communicate to us the full extent of what she's feeling or what she's going through, which is kind of my first thought as I'm reading through it, because it's very difficult to portray the whole picture if you're really in that zone.
Right. And it's such a vulnerable position to be in, right? Especially as you're going into adolescence. And I'm going to add one more category you very nicely did mention, which is pediatricians.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
No,
Yes.
because I was just at a pediatric meeting last night, and the first vignette of a child with an eating disorder started by the pediatrician saying, you've gained more weight than you've grown. And that
It's a big
one
problem.
comment, I'm sure in and of itself, it isn't enough to set a child on a path for a lifelong, potentially lifelong eating disorder. But it was an unnecessary and significant trigger.
Well, I would like to say that they say, genes load the gun and environment pulls the trigger. So they're finding that the genetic propensity for anorexia and bulimia, the risk for it is about 60%. So the only 40% is environment. For binge eating disorder, it's about 45%. So it could have been enough of a trigger if that person had a genetic propensity. You don't know how someone's going to take something. It's all about their perception. And most people who have an eating disorder have a very specific memory of when something turned for them. So it could have been a trigger. It's a very sad situation. And a lot of pediatricians that I spoke to for my study really didn't know much about eating disorders and said the kids who come to them don't confide in them. And they have to see it as a comorbid condition, a side effect of an eating disorder to really recognize it, which is pretty terrible.
Mm. Right. And we'll get later, we may get to the fact that you don't necessarily have to be a below average weight to have an eating disorder. So it may not be something the
100%.
doctor can see. But speaking of weight, I just want to add one more thing before I forget. And I did bring this up at the meeting. I was happy to have 100 listening pediatricians to my question. There was a pediatrician named, I think, William Wilkoff, and he put it's on mdedge.org or whatever on a doctor's information website. And he asked, should we be doing blind weights for healthy kids? I didn't ask you this beforehand, so I'm not trying to kid you out of the blue, but basically you can look up I can send you the link. And it's easy to find, mdedge.com. His idea was that it's so easy to traumatize kids over such a sensitive topic. And we really need to have more of a neutral approach to healthy habits as opposed to a specific weight. So
100%, which I think also is why instead of not letting them see what they weigh, if you preface it with your weight shows us how you've grown and where you are on the growth chart, and it's an important indicator of your health. We do this just like we take your blood pressure, just like we take your CBC and all the blood work. This is just one more indicator of what we do. It's not indicative of anything else, but just how you're growing on your growth chart. I think it's really important for them to preface it. There is a movement now for people who have a card that's printed and it says on it, please don't weigh me if I don't need to be weighed or whatever it is, because it's hard for them. But I think that's for older kids. I think kids that are that young, if you start saying we're not going to tell you what you weigh, that can create its own set of problems. I think we should just address it.
Right. It's how it's presented. And in the article, he goes into how it may, strike up conversations about weight. And I think it's all in how it's done. But that was my concern when I first heard of the concept of blind weights for children who don't have eating disorders. This is something that's done for children who already have been diagnosed with eating disorders. Yeah. Something to be thought about. But I do think that, and parents have done this for me, and it was helpful. They've said to me, please don't discuss my child's weight with them at all. Don't mention it. And I've stopped using weight as a conversation at all because I find that it triggers more than it helps.
100%. It absolutely does. It's a very hard topic. We have to talk about weight over thinness. BMI is not necessarily a good indicator of health anymore. And, there are people who are technically, or I guess, according to BMI, thin or heavy, but that doesn't make you healthy or unhealthy. So we have to be really careful how we talk about it, especially with kids, because it's so influential in their life and it's long lasting.
Right. And again, if you can focus on healthy habits, healthy activity, healthy eating as opposed to a diet where you restrict, I think that's where the conversation should be leading and not on a specific number. Because sometimes parents will say, well, what should my child weigh? I'm very concerned that they weigh too much. What should they weigh?
That's a hard one. But the reality is first of all, we moralize food. We tell them that there are good foods and bad foods. We use food as rewards and punishments. That has to stop completely because you mess up a person's relationship with food. Sweet things are only rewards. It becomes a whole mess. That could be an entire show in and of itself. But yeah, I think it shouldn't be about weight. I think it should be about, first of all, everyone has a genetic predisposition of a range of where they're going to be. So you can starve yourself, but eventually you're going to go back to that equilibrium that your body is meant to be at. So we have to be really careful how we talk. We can talk about the fact that as long as the child is eating well, healthy, feels good, nourishing their body, having joyful movement, they're going outside, they're doing things that they like, They're not just trying to exercise to lose weight. Then you create healthy habits that will change. And like you mentioned, when they get through their teen years and they have that growth spurt, they're meant to pack on the pounds beforehand, and they will shoot up and they will, equalize at a place that's healthy and normal for them.
Right, you remind me to get back to my question. Okay,
Okay.
so what happened to her is she grew 4 to 5 inches in adolescence, and at the same time she lost weight. And what did we just say we were supposed to do in adolescence?
Gain weight.
Gain weight.
Absolutely.
So that was already problematic.
Yes.
So that was really like my biggest red flag already. And what wasn't mentioned there, but I think we should talk about is, what do you think of the reaction was the people around her friends, her family, when she was losing all this weight and getting taller?
She was getting validation, absolutely, from friends and family. And that certainly fuels the fire and her feelings for wanting to get more of this validation, especially because she was bullied or felt uncomfortable about her body the other way. So this was kind of like telling her to keep doing it, right? Because we were enforcing that it's positive. When you do that, you have to be so careful how you speak to your children, daughters, sons. I mean, everyone is susceptible. I think it's really important. You can't just talk about their physical appearance. It's definitely, as somebody with anorexia, which I'm not certain that she has that or not, it's almost a competition. So for them, every pound that they lose, every time someone notices that they lost weight, it actually fuels their entire mindset. It's very negative and terrible for them, actually.
What do you think the family could have done if I don't know if they knew she was being bullied, to like intervene right then?
What could they have done to intervene right then? That's a great question. Well, first of all, I feel as if perhaps the social workers or teachers in the school, especially if the girl was younger, they're very close with the teachers. They're there during meal times. They spend a lot more time with the girls. They need to be trained to notice when a girl is being bullied, and they need to stop it in the classroom. Less than the parents. If the parents realize they had to go to the school, but the reality is the teacher is the one who deals with the girls, and the hanhala, or the head of the school. They're the ones who are going to deal with the girls. They have to notice these things. They need to know what to look for. They need to create classrooms that don't have weight stigma and bullying. There's tons of that in the classroom. Most of people's trauma from weight stigma and bullying comes from the classroom, whether it's friends or teachers. It's that has to change, which is why it's so important to educate the teachers. No one means to do this. They're not trying to do this. It's just, this is kind of how they've been used to talking all the time. They have to change their mindset.
Right. And I think some parents might think, well, my child's being bullied because they're too heavy, so I will make sure that they lose that weight so they won't get bullied. I had a child in my practice who was very young, whose family did just that. They put her on a diet when she was like 8 years old. And yeah, she lost weight when she should not have been.
I mean, the reality is the studies show that if a child in their growth years, right, during adolescence, any period of time during adolescence, if they have a reduced nutrient intake, if they fast or have a significant change in eating habits, it can lead to cognitive impairment. I mean, you're talking, they're going to suffer. It doesn't take a lot in those kinds of ages and stages to really devastate a child. It's not the right way to go. I get it. They don't want their child to suffer. They're really doing it out of love.
Right.
No one's doing anything mean, but it's not the right way to handle it. It's not going to actually be good for the child. They're not going to learn to accept themselves and love themselves for who they are. And when they feel more comfortable in their body and they don't have that judgment around food, they won't actually be eating all that food or feel as food as a comfort, because they won't need it. It will have a whole different relationship and meaning to them.
Right. And that's an amazing answer. Okay, so let's go back to her. And now she's in 11th grade. And now she's saying, I still feel traumatized by my experiences being bullied as a fat child. I'm going to use that word. And I wanted to know what you thought at that point.
I mean, it's a real and difficult problem in schools, as we just kind of mentioned, but I don't actually believe people realize how influential their comments are and how harmful they can be and intimidating for girls, even their friends. I just don't think they realize what they're saying. So again, education is the only way that we have to change it. Teachers need to know what to look for. They need to make those changes. In high school, it's the girls who generally notice their friends are struggling with an eating disorder or they've changed. It's not the teachers. They're not eating with them. They have them for periods. They're not their whole half-day teacher. But when they're younger, these teachers should be noticing exactly the dynamic of the classroom. That's part of their job. And if they don't know what to look for and they don't know what the problems are, then they won't know how to change it.
Right, right. What I'm thinking though is that trauma is something that can be dealt with in therapy. Like what she's basically doing is she's dealing with her trauma of having been bullied as an overweight child by continuing, as we're going to get to restrict and diet. But had it been realized as something she needed help with, she could have gotten help, therapy.
Absolutely. But
Yeah.
and the therapy would work, but if the classroom dynamic remains the same, then every time she goes back into that classroom, the therapy is being chipped away at, right? It's not going to work as well. So we kind of have to, of course, she needs the therapy and she needs the
Right. I
help,
hear what you're saying.
but the classroom dynamic has to change.
When you say the dynamic, because she's not describing being bullied anymore, she's describing struggling with intrusive feelings. She used the word intrusive in the article of past experiences. She's not continuously being bullied. So I guess what you're referring to is even if she had therapy to feel better about her body at whatever size it was, instead of feeling she had to maintain a smaller body, if you changed the culture of the class, if you didn't, the culture would continue to come back. And is that what you're saying?
I think she just had weight stigma. I don't know if it was just about the size of her. She felt bullied, it sounded like, in a lot of aspects of being heavy, that not being valuable for that. So yes, the therapy would have helped and the girls maybe outgrow some of that childish banter. But if she's taking therapy, let's say, and she's in fourth, fifth, sixth grade, and this is happening throughout the entire time, then I don't think she can actually resolve the trauma completely. She won't be able to get out of it, even with the therapy, because it's just re-happening over and over again.
Right. I was talking about in 11th grade.
Oh, so I agree with you. In 11th grade, I think it's a different dynamic altogether, because I do think that therapy would help and that the girls are in a different place. They shouldn't be. There might be some girls, but I'm sure she has a clique of girls and people. She sounds like she was traumatized by what happened to her. I agree with you 100%. And she definitely has the intrusive thoughts, which is a hallmark of an eating disorder. Just that terminology, the intrusive thoughts, that eating disorder voice that goes on, which is really hard. She's not going to be able to get out of it just by saying, "I want to get out of it." She needs help.
No, for sure. For sure. Yeah. So then what she's doing now is she says, I'm extremely health conscious. Those are her exact words. I don't eat any carbs and I don't eat high calorie foods.
Now, is that health conscious or that is just restricting? Honestly, we talked about anorexia when we kind of talked about this girl, but there's such a thing as OSFED, which is other specified feeding or eating disorders. And one of those ones is called orthorexia, which is an obsession around healthy eating. Just the idea that maybe anything that they might think is harmful or unhelpful to them, they'll take out of their diet, whether it's non-organic food or processed food or carbs in this case. It could be a mixture if she's making it about health versus being skinny. She might not be being 100% truthful to us or herself. She might not really realize even what's going on. But there is such a thing as this orthorexia, which is also an eating disorder of sorts.
Now, do you think that these are all separate diagnoses that you stay in those little, silos, or do you think that there may be like a slippery slope? Because I've heard, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that even a teenager choosing to be vegetarian might be a red flag, that they're already restricting. Might not.
Yes,
Definitely.
you have to watch it. No, I think you actually do have to watch that, because if you grew up in a vegetarian home and that's what your family did, then I wouldn't be concerned. But if all of a sudden out of the blue they decided meat, chicken, whatever it is not healthy for me, and that's why they're doing it, I would watch it. Sometimes it's animal cruelty. They might have another reason. It doesn't really matter their reason. If all of a sudden they just decided out of the blue that they're restricting something out of their diet, or they'll only eat certain times of day, or they have to, drink 3 cups of water before they have any meal, or make all these odd food rules, then yes, it's a slippery slope. It's definitely the start of something.
And is that what you see, though, that they may start with something that would fit more into OSFED or orthorexia and then just keep getting more and more restrictive?
Depending on the girl and the situation. Absolutely. I think orthorexia sometimes stays there, but I do think it does develop into anorexia, because it really is kind of a precursor. But that's kind of the concept of the disordered eating, right? They have all these weird rules and things around their food, and then that slides into an eating disorder if we don't treat it and help them. If this girl would have gotten help a while ago, then she might not be in the place that she's in right now, because we could have stopped it at the disordered eating phase versus maybe going into it, which I can't say that she fully has an eating disorder. I don't know enough, but it might have helped her.
Right. We're not making a diagnosis on anybody. We're not here to provide, medical advice. We're just here to try to get good information out. And this is all good information. I'm still stuck on that though, because I always try to think, how can we prevent or, stop it earlier in its course? It would be true that the earlier you can pick up and treat or prevent, the better, obviously.
100%. It's the easiest to treat the earlier you get it. I mean, the average amount of time that it takes to cure an eating disorder is 6 years on average, and that's the curable ones. Not every eating disorder is cured, but so the earlier you get it, the less entrenched they are in it. So it's easier to turn them back out of it for sure.
Right. I mean, I think of these, intrusive thoughts, these repetitive thoughts kind of making, tracks in the brain. The longer they go on, the deeper they get.
Really, there's a real eating disorder voice that's talking to them.
Right.
It's almost, it's telling them you're not good, you're horrible, you do bad things, and it's on them 24/7. So it's almost in a way like a whole nother being inside them. It's very stressful. It's very difficult. It's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to reiterate, we said it earlier, that you can be a normal weight and still be diagnosable as having an eating disorder.
Correct. I mean, there's such a thing as atypical anorexia. Somebody who actually has anorexia, but they're not below a minimally amount of weight that they might have a judgment call for regular anorexia below a threshold that's normal for your age. It might be that you're even heavy and have anorexia.
Right.
Absolutely. There's a lot of mixing and matching and overlap.
I think you have to be really careful with the doctor, though, because not all doctors are aware of that. I heard actually a physician mother whose daughter had an eating disorder where the pediatrician said, nope, she's fine. She's right on the curve.
I mean, I can tell you my own story. The doctor said the exact same thing to my mother. She said, look, she's a little too thin, but I think her thighs aren't so big. She doesn't, her thighs aren't too skinny. She's like, she's fine. She's fine. It's exactly what happened to me many years ago. So I know exactly what that's like, and it's wrong. The doctors don't know enough. They just don't know enough to realize it's such a tiny minute till it switches. You have that predisposition, you have a trauma, you have somebody who says something to you, you have a situation, you're scared to go on to seminary or to start your life or to get married. There's so many things that could just turn the trigger on. So you have to be so careful.
Right. And so much of this is internalized.
100%.
Right? Who else knows what's going on in your head except you?
That's the biggest issue, because it's a lot of perception. Even if the messages are not meant to be given to you a certain way, but that's the way you take them, then that's the risk that you have. So it is very difficult. That's why we have to do the prevention programs earlier and help the girls.
Right. As far back as we can push it, the better. That's why this is such an important organization, and it's an important conversation. So I'm really glad you're having this with me. So let's go back. She talks about how she exercises a ton.
Yes. Right. I mean, obviously, we know that sometimes exercise is used as a compensatory behavior, right? Either they thought they ate too much or whatever it is, they're going to binge, or they'll purge, they might use laxative, they might exercise, they might vomit. So, she's basing her entire self-worth on her weight and shape and her ability to control it. That's what happens. And a colleague of mine, she talks about this concept of the mind-share continuum, where if you think of a brain, when someone is in the throes of an eating disorder, their entire brain is taken up with what they look like, what they're eating today, how much they weigh, their shape, their measurements. It's completely, they can't think of other things. It's not a rational situation. So you need to lessen that, right? We can't even almost get into that brain, especially for someone with anorexia, until you've kind of renourished them. It's almost impossible to start the therapy.
Right. Absolutely. So then she says, besides the intrusive thoughts about remembering being bullied, she's also feeling sick, tired, and having stomach pains.
Mm-hmm. I mean, these are all symptoms of an eating disorder. Tired, of course, is going to be expected, right? She has a lack of nutrition. She's not nourishing her brain. She's, this has been going on for a while, so she's lacking. Her stomach pain is definitely an eating disorder symptom. Her digestion is all messed up from the lack of food or eating only certain kinds of food, maybe raw food, maybe only vegetables. She doesn't eat carbs. She doesn't eat other things. She could have any kind of stomach problem actually from it. So yes. I mean, it could be somatic, as you say, but I think it actually could be an eating disorder. There are a lot of signs and symptoms that go right along those lines.
Right. I mean, we don't know. Obviously, this is, a story. I mean, I believe it's a real letter, but still we don't have all the information. But you briefly mentioned somatic, so our listeners know, because this was a conversation we had before. I know I, as a pediatrician, I see kids who often, when they're struggling with something, start having stomach aches, headaches, fatigue. Those very non-specific symptoms could be somaticizing, the emotions that she hasn't been able to deal with in a more effective way are now causing symptoms. So it's not necessarily from the eating disorder. We really don't know.
That's correct. I agree with you 100%. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, we haven't talked yet about the relationship with prior trauma to eating disorders. I do. There is a connection, isn't there?
Absolutely. I mean, trauma is one of the big triggers for an eating disorder. If someone has that propensity and then, they're close or they're on the cusp and then they have a traumatic situation. For some people, it's a way of taking control back in their life, right? If they control what they eat, then they don't have to admit the lack of control they might have felt during a trauma or some kind of abuse or something like that. So absolutely, it's a huge trigger for sure.
And that's why I had mentioned getting the therapy when she was older. I wasn't talking about in the midst of being bullied. You're right. You
I
can't
got
do
it.
therapy to a child who's being bullied. That would not be appropriate. That's kind of like blaming the victim. That's not what I had in mind. I want to make sure that's clear.
It was clear, definitely.
Yeah. And maybe later we can talk a little bit about different kinds of therapy, because, I think when you say the word therapy, some people think, oh, any therapist would do. And I don't
Absolutely
believe
not.
that's true.
That is 100% not true.
Yeah.
100% not true. So I definitely would love to talk about that because it's so important to find somebody who is versed in all the different modalities of treatment. You can't just say, I did have a situation recently where somebody called me, a therapist called me and said that a girl was diagnosed with anorexia and she was getting some treatment, but she had a lot of anxiety. And so they wanted a from therapist to treat her anxiety because there wasn't anybody here who was a from therapist for the anorexia, and that she would get anorexia treatment, but it would be separate to get the anxiety treatment. And I said, absolutely not. They're part and parcel of the same problem. You can't treat her without being part of the team that's treating her. So either you're a part of that team and they can tell you what she needs, or you can't treat her. It's not something, an eating disorder patient needs a team of people. They need a physical health professional, a mental health professional, a dietitian or nutritionist. Sometimes there's such a thing as recovery coaches. They have nurses. Some programs actually have nurses that each patient is assigned a nurse 24/7 so that they're never alone through the inpatient treatment. It's a team of people, and there are a lot of issues to address. And you must know people who are experienced. They must know how to treat an eating disorder.
Right. And the therapy that's used is not just any old therapy.
Correct. Yeah, they have a special CBT for eating disorders, but they have family-based treatments. I mean, there are a lot of different types of treatments. There are a lot of different types of eating disorders, and they
Right.
stem from different things, right? So you can't have a one size fits all. Plus, each girl has gone through her own experience. Some of them, like you said, have a trauma. It might not always be trauma based, but then you have to address their trauma too. You can't just address the eating disorder, because if you don't address the underlying issues, the eating disorder will never be resolved. So there's a lot of factors, and you really do need people who know what they're doing.
Right. What have you noticed during the pandemic about eating disorders?
They're up 60% is what the most recent empirical article that I saw showed. Up 60%. It's people are struggling finding treatment. They're struggling, to find providers that know what they're doing, and just even to find a place. I did get another call recently of somebody in New Jersey whose daughter has been in and out of treatment facilities for the last year. And she's waiting to go to an inpatient facility, but she's going to have like a month where they just can't get her in. And she said, what can we do for her for this month? She said, because we can't just take care of her at home. It's not going to work. She always falls back into her patterns and everything. So it's been very, very difficult. It's been very, very difficult. We're trying to find her an eating disorder recovery coach. This is kind of somebody who will spend time with her. I don't know if you've heard of these recovery coaches. They're quite interesting. Carolyn Costin, she ran Montanito, an eating disorder clinic in California. I think it was California for many years. Anyway, she does an eating disorder coaching certification. And it's really wonderful because the therapist, they're not with the patient day to day, right? So when the patient has to eat or get dressed or go to a social function or shop for their own food or prepare their own food, they're all alone. So the coach kind of helps coach them through these things, spend more time with them. It's a little more hands-on and one-on-one. So somebody who's getting over an eating disorder, this can be extremely helpful for them. And so, there's only one that I even know. She's extremely busy. I would love more people to go into this. It's actually a very high in demand field right now.
Who's the from one? Should we even say her name?
I don't know if she wants to. Yeah, no, she's very busy. I know I spoke to her recently. She's extremely busy, but it's wonderful that she did it. I think it's a 6-month or an 8-month program. Most people who work with eating disorders have their own experience that they went through,
Right.
or a loved one. It feels like a higher calling for a lot of people.
It's a passion,
Yeah.
right.
Correct.
So this is one thing that Atzmi does, is connect people with services.
I just do that personally on the side because I've talked to so many people over the last few years about their struggles, their different things, and I just try to connect people. Sometimes I provide support for parents or other people who are going through it as a personal thing. Atzmi doesn't do it. That's just something that I do, because mothers who are having first-time adolescents are really struggling. How do I talk to my daughter about her body? How do I talk to her about food? It's a really hard conversation, and if they have their own issues with food or their body, they don't want to pass them on to their daughter, but they don't know how to not, because they feel like they're modeling this behavior and they don't have control over what they do. And that's really the purpose of what I'm doing, because I feel like the girls we educate today are the mothers of tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So maybe it might not be perfect for them, the girls that I'm teaching, but they'll know how to talk to their daughters, and then the next generation to their daughters. So we can stop the cycle of some of this, even though it won't be today or tomorrow, but I think it will be over time when we teach them new skills and new ways of dealing with, things that are going to disappoint or be difficult for them. We have to know how to deal with them, how to question them. Yeah.
Right. If I were a mom listening to this right now, I'd be like, but no, I want it for my generation. What kind of tips can you share for the moms of today so we don't feel like all is lost?
It's interesting. I have another colleague who did a lot of body image programs for 35 and up. She did a lot. She said she just didn't get the same change. The women were so entrenched. It was much harder than working with the teens. It's much harder for them. I mean, there was a story she told me of a close friend of hers. So she's in her 50s, whose father passed away, and the mother was at the funeral, and she was telling everybody at the funeral that she's still wearing the same size clothing that she wore when she got married when she was 18. And this is at her husband's funeral. That's what she's talking about, is what her body looks like. Or stories of women in hospice care, end of life care, not wanting to eat a dessert because they can't have the fat or the calories. It's so entrenched in us. I think it's really hard to break. I mean, I definitely think there are some things we can try to do and things we can work on. I talk about changing the conversation all the time. What do we do when we meet somebody? Oh, you look so great. Did you lose weight? You look so beautiful. That dress is gorgeous on you. That's how we talk to little girls. That's how we talk to everybody. We're not trying to reinforce it. It's just the way we're taught to speak. We have to stop focusing on externals. It's just so nice to see you. What have you been up to? Let's talk about something else. We can't always, not that there isn't a time and a place. I would never tell the girls it's not important to care about what you look like.
Right.
But your feelings about your body can't run the show. So we have to kind of change the conversation. And food is a big problem. We use food in schools. I have this argument with my kids' teachers all the time. Stop giving them Danishes if they come to davening in the morning on time, or if one teacher gave my son a 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew for winning a spelling bee. Well, I used to have to pay my children, and I would be like, give me the soda. I'll pay you for it. Because they wouldn't listen to me. I would beg them, please, I don't feed them this food. I don't even want them to associate good things with sugary food.
Right.
Why do we do that? But it's just kind of how we're built. We have to change that. We talked about the fact we can't talk about thinness. We have to talk about health. How do we feel good? Doing things that are good for our body and nourishing to our body, but not necessarily about losing weight or being on a diet. And we have to stop judging people around their weight. We do that. We really, really do. People have to stop stigmatizing people, assuming that if they're heavy, that they're lazy or they're not they don't work hard or whatever it is. We stigmatize. We have to stop doing that. We've got to make some big changes,
Yeah. I believe in the power of change. And I also believe that a parent shouldn't give up if they, like anything else, right? Like if you slip, you're trying really hard not to have that kind of language. And then you could say to your child, oh, I shouldn't have said that because then you have a chance to model that you're working on it yourself and it's hard.
And I think that that's great. We should apologize to our kids all the time. Sometimes it happens that you didn't know something, or you said something, and you could say, I was just in the heat of the moment. I was angry. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have handled it like that. Listen, a parent doesn't have to apologize all the time, but when your child sees that you can apologize, there's no shame in making a mistake. We're expected to make mistakes. That's a normal part of life. We're not perfect. We create this atmosphere of shame around our physical bodies, around anything secret, because God forbid it would come out on a shit off resume. Shame creates guilt, embarrassment. They don't think that they're supposed to ask for help, that they're supposed to need help. It just creates all these issues, and we haven't even talked about social media, which is, of course, a big problem as well. So
you want to go there?
We can go there if you want to. I'm just saying, I think we are kidding ourselves if we think our girls aren't on social media.
Right.
But the thing is that we're not going to stop them from going on. But if we have the conversations with them about the dangers of social media, why it's unrealistic, what's really happening there. Dove has a whole self-esteem project, and they have videos. They've spent a lot of money on adolescent education. They do a lot of videos on how, just the change of a model on a billboard, what it looked like in the beginning. They do a lot of videos about mothers and daughters and about their appearance, feelings, stuff. They have some really great stuff that people should look at. But social media, obviously, they're trying to sell you something. Even if it's not monetary, they want you to come back to their page so that the advertisers can sell you something. So they're showing you that the world is perfect, that everyone's perfect. We have all these filters and all these, how many hundreds of pictures did someone take with their family to get that one perfect shot that they posted on Instagram? It's unrealistic, but it makes us feel bad about ourselves. So if we kind of talk to our daughters about that and what that means and what that looks like, at least we gave them something to think about, to question.
Right. And it's younger than you think.
Correct.
It's
100%.
so much younger than you think. For the body image webinar that we did, Rachel Tuckman showed a video. I don't know how to tell people how to find that video, but children who were like 7 years old were talking about how they were worried their bellies were too big or looking themselves in the mirror. Very, very young. And children are getting smartphones at very, very young ages.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the statistics, 80% of 13-year-olds have attempted to lose weight. 50% of girls between 11 and 13 think that they're overweight.
Right.
32% of 5-year-olds are already restraining what they eat. So I'm saying you're right. It's terrible. Yeah. No, but your webinars were fabulous. Actually, they brought out a lot of important points, and all your speakers were fabulous. I really enjoyed them.
Thank you. They were, and people can go find it on the JOMA YouTube channel. We don't have to go down that path any further because we did go into it in great detail.
Okay.
So I think that's a lot of really, really good information. I don't know if you want to go into, I think we kind of talked a little bit about the subtypes of eating disorders, and I don't think I want to go into that in more detail because that's not really the purpose of this talk.
Absolutely.
But I did think that with the answer to that piece, which we're not going into, he did kind of just refer to it as anorexia, and people would just reiterate the point that there are many subtypes of eating disorders, and disordered eating is what's going on here, whether she meets the criteria for any specific diagnosis. There's disordered eating.
Yeah, and she needs some help with that for sure.
Right.
And I also want to reiterate the point that you brought out, that you cannot look at somebody and tell if they have an eating disorder. That is not a way to know that. So it's really important to realize that I can't just look at you and say, oh, you have an eating disorder. Absolutely not.
Right. And I think as a parent, you're your child's best advocate. And if your pediatrician is not aware, don't let them sway you by telling you, oh, look, the growth chart looks great. Everything's fine. And they're telling me everything's fine.
100%. I think it's really important that you trust your instincts. You're the best advocate for your child. So many stories. How many stories have you heard of parents, even a person for themselves, just felt like something was wrong. They just went back, and then they figured something else out. You must trust your instincts and don't blame yourself. In other words, they're just a complex onset. It's not one little thing that that change the whole course. I think it's really wonderful for people to realize that they're so genetic, because it kind of takes the blame factor off. If they have this genetic propensity, it could be considered something similar to Crohn's or diabetes or
Right.
another genetic predisposition. So you're right, something might trigger it, but that's true with any disorder like that, even Crohn's or diabetes or whatever it is, high blood pressure. Sometimes you just have that predisposition. So there's no point in having blame. Let's just see what we can do to help. Yeah.
Right, that's really important, and I'm glad that there's a lot of effort now to destigmatize mental illness and other conditions in our communities, and the regular communities, the secular communities, and our communities. It's really, really important. There's a lot of work to be done. I can tell you that as a pediatrician, because they are treated as somehow different, less shameful.
Right. Right. I mean, you wouldn't do that to a physical ailment, but then, a lot of times parents, when they can't quantify it, they'll be like, we're spending so much time on you and so much money on you. And they don't understand kind of how it works as well. It's harder to understand because they can't see it, they can't feel it, they can't touch it. Whereas a physical illness, you can measure it in a whole different way.
Right. And this isn't something that a child would or a young adult would have any control over.
Agreed.
So, what do you think are some tips if a parent is suspecting their child has an eating disorder? Because we've given a lot of, of the red flags away. We've given a lot of the signs.
I would say that the key to successful treatment is early diagnosis and treatment. So if you have any suspicion, whether you're wrong or right, it's worth getting evaluated, right? You can talk to your social worker at school, talk to a mental health professional. You can even talk to your pediatrician and say you want them screened. I mean, as long as you push through it, even if they disagree with you. I would definitely talk to somebody, and like we said, don't be afraid to push for what your child needs. That's really what a parent is there for. Early treatment is best. Ask the questions that need to be asked, educate yourself, try to understand better what your child is going through. Use the resources. There are so many resources online. NEDA, National Eating Disorder Association, has a screening tool. That could be just a precursor to seeing if you feel like more needs to be done. The Eating Recovery Center has a list of resources and websites, as does the Eating Disorder Foundation. They all have a lot of kind of resources that you can do. I have some books that we can talk about later too that might be helpful,
Sure.
But it's because it's a team effort. You have to really keep looking for the right team. And I will say that, every patient has their own challenge. So if someone has some people who have eating disorders are violent, some of them are being treated against their will. Some are like a binge eating disorder, which is very different from anorexia or bulimia. They might have ARFID, which is, when you're very tactile, food is very difficult for you to swallow, to smell, to taste. It's not even about your weight or what you look like most of the time with ARFID. Some of them have even had multiple layers and places of treatment. So they're already kind of in a zone where they're not sure if they're even going to ever be cured. Some are traumatic situations, some are male. So I'm just saying each patient has to be treated as an individual. You can't just assume because one person had a good response to a certain type of treatment or a certain treatment provider that you will have the same. It has to be a very individualized plan. So it's really important to educate yourself about your child's situation, and really as early, if you notice anything, there's no harm. If it's nothing, it's nothing. And if it's just disordered eating, not just disordered eating is an issue in and of itself, but I'm saying if it's disordered eating, it could very quickly evolve. So get them the help for that then. There's a lot of things that can be done.
Right. That's a lot of great advice. But in terms of talking to your child, because you didn't say talk to your child.
Oh, sure. I thought that was okay. Yeah.
Assumed, but how would you? What if you're like, I don't even know what to say?
To talk to your child, to ask them if they're having trouble.
Mhm.
Is what you mean? Yeah. I mean, I would definitely sit them down and ask them questions about how they're feeling about their appearance, about how they look, and I would say to them, oh, do you, is how you look as important? See, I don't. In my opinion, and this might not be what you want to hear, is that if a child is already in the throes of an eating disorder, having a conversation with them is not as relevant because they need help. So they might not tell you the truth. They might not respond to you in a way that they're not completely rational if it's already in the throes of an eating disorder. So you can watch what they do. Are you finding hidden wrappers? Are you seeing them throw food away? Are they withdrawing from their friends and from their siblings? Are they not participating in activities? Are their grades dropping? Watch I would say noticing what they are versus having the conversation with them is more important. And then if you feel that you're really noticing things, I would talk to the social worker and I would sit them down and say, you're having concerns. You're noticing that they're hiding food or they're not eating their meals, or they're noticing this, and that you love them and you're concerned. You'd like to see if you could get them some help for that. I don't know that you're going to get the honest answer out of them about exactly what's going on. It's pretty typical for a person with an eating disorder to be very secretive about it and not disclose.
Right, but there's different subtypes. Because yes, you're right, and I knew you were going to say that, and that's important for parents to understand that just because the kid denies it doesn't mean it's not a thing.
Mhm.
But especially earlier on, or from some different subtypes, like for example, a child with ARFID, unlike
Mhm.
other eating disorders, doesn't have a distorted body image, doesn't have a voice saying you need to lose weight. They're often very distressed by their inability to eat, and they will tell you.
So that's, yes, and that's ARFID, and that should be noticed pretty soon. I actually had someone who called me recently, an 18-year-old girl who the mother just all these years had been going to specialists and people. No one told her about ARFID. She understood something was wrong with her daughter. She had a fear of eating. Food made her nauseous. She thought she would vomit from it. She was scared of eating. Her appetite was so small. She didn't grow. She had to go on growth hormones. But now she was turning 18 and she was like, finally, recently, she went somewhere and someone said, have you ever had her tested for ARFID? And that's what she has. And she's 18 years old. That's sad because she's been
Right.
struggling with this for so many years. And the pediatrician should have seen she was not on the growth chart, like wondering what else was maybe going on. Somebody else might have known it, but no one knew about it, perhaps. In that case, definitely. But the mother would kind of notice that, right? The kid's not eating. She would say to her, why don't you want your food? Well, I'm afraid I'm going to throw up, or the smell makes me sick. If the mother was more knowledgeable about the types of eating disorders or the issues that go along with them, then she might be able to pick up on it faster. It wasn't her fault. She never knew. No one ever told her. She just had no idea. She didn't even know it was such a thing.
Right. But I still think it's a good idea to start with the child, especially also even earlier on in an eating disorder, you may find the child may divulge more.
That's very true. Yes, before they're in the throes of it. I mean, I would definitely talk to them about how they're feeling about their body. If you start to notice things, I wouldn't start with what did you eat today,
Right.
or are you eating enough, or
Right.
are you tired? Are you having, just see how are things going with school? How are they going with your friends? Why do you think you're not going outside with your friends as much? I'm really tired. Also, why are you so tired? Do you think that maybe are you sleeping enough? Are you eating enough? Like kind of put it in terms where you're not accusing, I think is the most important thing. And ask them the questions based on their binge eating disorder is very different. They're going to be hiding food. You're going to notice food missing from the kitchen. You're going to notice that they, consumed large quantities of food. So for that, obviously, there's some emotional issues that need to be addressed. They might start by saying, I notice that a lot of food has gone missing. You know, I don't think asking them if they're hungry is going to be helpful. If they're eating a quantity of food that's so large, um, I just don't think asking them if they're hungry is going to help. You might have to say to them, is this something that you just feel compelled to do? Are you not able to control it? I really want to understand. As long as it's not accusatory,
Right.
I don't think you're going to go in a bad way. If you're really trying to understand what your child is going through and you ask it truly that way, I think you'll be okay.
Right. And it can be hard for a parent to ask these kind of questions. You may not be really so open to the answers, right? So I think that's also a good idea to go to your child's pediatrician and tell them in advance, this is what I'm concerned about. Do you think you could have a conversation with my child? Sometimes it helps to have an objective professional.
I think it's a lot easier. I think
Yeah.
it's the right way to go for sure. That's why the social worker, the pediatrician,
Right.
somebody else, because it sometimes sounds accusatory from a parent, even if it's not. That's how the child hears it. It's different. I agree with you with a health professional.
Right. Right. That's all really, really good information. So, what kind of resources? You talked a little bit about NIDA. You mentioned a couple others quickly. I want to make sure people are left with good resources
All
besides
right. Well,
me.
yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it depends what you're looking for. There are a lot of wonderful biographical stories that can kind of help you understand the struggle of
Mm,
someone going through an eating disorder. And then there are, of course, general books which give you information about eating disorders if you're having a concern. There are a lot of podcasts too, by the way. Yours is wonderful. But there are a lot of podcasts too, to listen to find out, does this sound like my daughter or my child and they're going through this? I say daughter because I specialize in girls. We will be doing boys programs. It's not that boys don't have eating disorders, because they do. Not as often, but still boys are struggling with it. Their struggles are a little different than girls, the mindset and what's underlying it. But yeah, so I guess some really wonderful biographical books, I would say. One is called Brave Girl Eating by Harriet Brown. And it's just kind of a chronicle of a family struggle with anorexia, how a girl goes from kind of near starvation to renewed health. But I think it's important that they kind of understand the journey and what it is, because it's also really important, which we didn't talk about. And I just want to mention that if your child is in the throes of an eating disorder, or not even in the throes, but you're struggling with that, you need support yourself. You need help also, because your whole family is going to go through this. It doesn't just affect the child. It affects the entire dynamic of the family. There's a lot of, if you do family therapy, especially, there's a lot of hours spent trying to sit with the child and make them eat their food. There's a lot of appointments. There could be hospitalizations. It's hard. You need your help as well. So it's really important for a parent to have support groups. So sometimes reading these biographies kind of is helpful. There's also an organization called Feast. I don't know if you ever heard of it, FEAST. The lady who runs it, her daughter had anorexia, and she did sadly pass away, but she's actually a Jewish from woman in Israel who now is the executive director of Feast. It's really a support group for parents struggling with children with eating disorders. And they provide a ton of resources, support groups, help, articles. It's a great website. So I would say to check that out as well. There's another book called How to Disappear Completely by Kelsey Osgood. Also it's her own autobiography. So it's not somebody else writing it for her. She had also a long battle with anorexia, but she kind of talks about the social, physical, and emotional ramifications of what she went through. So it's a little different than your typical book. And then there was one other one that I found really fascinating called The Girl in the Red Boots, Making Peace with My Mother. It's a little bit different. This lady who wrote it, Judith Rabinor, is a psychologist who deals with eating disorders. But it's an intriguing book because she talks about, in the context of her own struggle with her mother, and how it relates to her eating disorder patients. So it really is very interesting because it kind of talks about the mother-daughter dynamic, but then also the struggles of the eating disorder patients that she saw. It was a very well-written book, actually. But some general books, if you want, just on eating disorders or issues with food. There's something called The Eating Disorder Source Book by Carolyn Costin, who I did mention her before. She does the coaching, but she's a therapist with over 30 years of research. It just is a great book full of information for loved ones who are experiencing an eating disorder with their child, and for the child or person themselves. There's a book called When Your Teen Has an Eating Disorder, Practical Strategies to Help Your Teen Recover from Anorexia, Bulimia, and Binge Eating, by Lauren Mulheim. Also fascinating book. Gives you kind of techniques to deal with and normalize certain eating behaviors, which is really important. Also teaches a little bit about intuitive eating, which we haven't really talked about, but is so important, I think, also.
Yes, that was my first interview, Gila Glassberg, and she has her own podcast called Get Into It, INTUIT.
I didn't know that. Oh, excellent. I want to listen to that. And then another one is called Surviving an Eating Disorder, Strategies for Families and Friends. So it really also addresses the silent sufferers, who are the siblings, the parents, relatives. But it also helps combat, I guess, common pitfalls that you might fall into in talking to somebody with an eating disorder, how to deal with them. It's pretty helpful. And then there's a book called Body Respect. I don't know if you've heard of this one, but the idea is what conventional health books get wrong, leave out, and she writes, and just plain fail to understand about weight. So it talks all about health at every size, a little bit about intuitive eating, just kind of things that we assume are tenets of medicine, but maybe are a little bit not, what we expect them to be. It's fascinating, actually. Great book.
Wow. Those are an amazing amount of resources. Now, I believe you told me, I get confused between Atzmi. There is another organization where people can reach out to get referrals. NEDA is a non-sectarian organization, NEDA.
Correct.
For referrals.
Yeah. So Ayala Tashafar, I think
Yes.
their website is Ayeleth, AYELETH.org. They help anyone I think anyone, but they really do help from people find practitioners to help with any kind of eating disorder. Esty Jacobs runs that organization. She's very good. But Relief does it as well. So
Right.
those are
Right.
the two organizations. Yeah.
Are there kosher eating disorder programs? And is that important?
Personally,
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's way more important to go to a facility that will help you live, because it can be life or death.
Right.
I understand the value of a kosher facility. Part of the problem with eating disorders is part of the, just part of getting better is that they all have to eat the same meals and eat at the same time. So when you have kosher, you're already separating those girls from other people. So there are a couple that have kosher programs, I believe, or who will bring in kosher food, but it kind of doesn't defeat the purpose, but it makes it a little more difficult because they already feel separate. There is one called, I think, Lauren something up in upstate New York that is kosher. That's the only one that I know that's completely kosher. It's, for some reason, the name is escaping me at the moment.
What we didn't underscore is that I think anorexia has maybe one of the highest mortality rates.
Correct. And suicide.
Right.
By suicide and just by complications from it. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Suicide
that has to be
rate is
taken
very
into
high.
account. You can always speak to your Rav. We're not here to poskin.
100%.
I wanted to make sure we got to that. So, wow, we could talk about this all night. There's so much that we didn't cover, but I think we covered a lot. I have to thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed speaking with you. You asked some very interesting and different questions, so it was really refreshing. I enjoyed it a lot.
I did too, and I think this is going to be a lot of great information for people. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the JOMA Preventative Health Podcast. If you've enjoyed this, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and share this with your friends. For more information, check out our Instagram at JOMA_org. Check out our website, www.joma.org, that's JOWMA.org, or email us at health@joma.org.